Hey guys, it's Drew with Drew's Quick Fixes and Hacks, and today we're going to talk about top 5 ways that mechanics can rip you off and some situations where you can avoid being ripped off. Alright, so let's start with number 1. If you have your car towed into a dealership, you're kind of helpless. The mechanics know that your car's there and that you're going to have them work on it and diagnose it. So they might charge you a diagnosis fee. A lot of dealerships charge you 1 hour's labor diagnosis fee. And then they'll usually call you, tell you what's wrong with your car, blah, blah, blah. I always stay with my car when I have it at a mechanic if I can. Some people don't have that luxury, unfortunately. But if you're there, they can talk to you, they can tell you what's wrong. But if you just drop your car off, they can really just upcharge you on a lot of stuff. So even just a regular mechanic. So be wary of having your car towed in before you know what's wrong. Try to do what you're doing here. Look up on YouTube, look on Google, and just say my car won't start, this is the symptoms. Go in, if you got a second car or another way of getting there, go into an auto parts store and talk to them about what the symptoms are with your car, whether it's making funny sounds or things like that. That'll help. Okay, so the other thing where mechanics rip you off, mechanics upcharge their parts when they're doing repairs. So if you go to like an auto parts store, AutoZone, O'Reilly, Advanced Auto Parts, you're going to get that part for a lot less. And you can choose what part you want, what brand you want, things like that. A lot of mechanics only use one type of part. It's usually very expensive because in addition to them upcharging, they'll have the part delivered by a company that delivers them. And so you're going to pay 30 to 40% more for that part. The other thing, when you get a part through a mechanic, sometimes they'll put in used parts and you don't know it. You don't want that. But it can happen. Now on the Tahoe, everything's up front here. This is the alternator, AC compressor. Those are what I'm going to be hopefully working on later this week. But you don't know if they're putting in used parts. Some mechanics get used parts. Sometimes it's necessary because that part may not be sold anymore on a car. You definitely want to ask a mechanic if they'll let you use your own parts. If they won't, I personally wouldn't work with them because most dealerships won't let you use your own parts because of warranty. They'll tell you, well, there's no warranty on the labor. I'm like, that's fine. Just do the parts. So, and if a mechanic says there's no warranty on the labor, that's fine with me. Like I said, I just rather have the part, and you'll save more money buying the part yourself. Especially if that part has a lifetime warranty, and you can keep that receipt and that record from either AutoZone or wherever, where they usually keep track of you based on your phone number. So if you need to have that repaired again, you can do the same thing. You can go to a different mechanic somewhere else and say, this is a warranted alternator. I'd like to use, you go buy the new alternator the way it works, and then you send the other one back under the warranty. So you have to obviously give it the new alternator to the mechanic. But that'll save you some cash. But let me tell you, a lot of times if you have the mechanic put in the part, and the thing is, you have to know that it's an alternator. Now, if the mechanic calls you up and says it's an alternator, you can ask them, hey, can I buy the part myself? You want to ask the mechanic that in advance, obviously. So when they know what it is, you can buy it yourself. Okay, so now let's go into the next one. Mechanics repair cars based on what's called book labor. And a lot of you may not know this. I learned this in an automotive class I took. So specific jobs are in this dealership book that say it's going to be like 1 hour, 1.5 hours. That's a great way when you're calling around. It's not set, but a lot of places go by the book. So, if you need a head gasket replaced, they might say that's 6 hours of labor, which is an extensive job. And in certain cars, it involves taking the whole top off the engine and everything. I always work with mechanics that let me buy my own parts if I know what's wrong with the car. So it does help to do some research before you bring your car in, see what might be the problem, and then you pay that fee to where most places charge like $125 diagnostic fee, and they'll tell you what's wrong, and you don't have to go to that place to have it fixed. Another thing they can do to rip you off, not really rip you off, but if you pay that diagnostic fee of $125, I usually don't like generally working with places that will not credit that $125 towards your actual labor. A lot of dealerships and places will just charge you that fee when they've already figured out what's wrong with the car, already taken most of it apart, and then they'll fix it charge you that upcharge on the parts and things like that, there are mechanics who will say that $125 or dealerships is credited towards the issue and the labor. So if you've got 3 hours labor, you'll get that 1 hour credited towards you. That's fair, in my opinion. I don't think that you should have to pay for the diagnostic and then pay again for the labor, which has already been done when they take the car apart to decide, But usually it's 1 hour diagnostic labor. It can be more if they need to get in there further. But just a heads up on that. Okay, so, let me give you some examples of times that I was scammed or my friends were scammed, okay? A lot of times, when your car needs repairs, it can be something very simple, and if your car's not starting or whatever, the mechanics or dealerships or whatever will make it seem like it's something a lot worse, okay? I'll give you an example. My friend had a Hummer H3, and it was having trouble starting. It would crank a little bit and then would stall out. Well, we took it to a dealership. It was actually, I guess, a Cadillac dealership, and they were, we did everything before we went in there. We sprayed starter fluid in the air filter, trying to get, because it was stalling out. Well, we took it into the dealership, the Cadillac dealership, and they did a diagnosis. They said he had a cracked engine head, and he bought this truck used, and I don't know, I guess it had like 80 or 120,000 miles on it, I'm not sure. And so, he sort of believed that. Well, what happened, they're known to have cracked heads. I guess that's a common issue. It's very possible through their tests that this did have a cracked engine head, but that was not the reason that the Hummer H3 was not starting. Okay, so here's what happened. So we come to pick the car up, and this was not really them scamming us. This was a mechanic error, and we got charged for it because they misdiagnosed it. So they actually did replace the engine head. Well, we come to pick up the truck, and the guy drives it around to the front to the little service entrance, and it stalls out again. And we're like, okay, that's the same problem it had before we took it in. So they didn't thoroughly test drive it or check it, or something went wrong. Well, it turns out they said, oh, well, you just needed some new spark plugs. Well, that was the issue to begin with, and it's very similar to what's happening with my Chevy Tahoe. The Hummer H3 just needed spark plugs, and he was charged for I think about $2,600 to have the engine head replaced, which was not directly affecting his starting the car. So when they replaced the spark plug, I asked him, I said, what was wrong with the car? The second time, he said, oh, you need new spark plugs. I said, well, couldn't that have been the problem to begin with instead of replacing the engine head? He was kind of silent. They ended up giving him a $900 discount, kind of calling it even, because the mechanic did replace the head on the engine. So they did have the layer. So they didn't cheat us on that, but they misdiagnosed it. It was the mechanic's fault for not properly diagnosing the issue. They should have been able to check the spark plugs and tell. But a lot of times when your car won't start, it can be something as simple as spark plugs. Now, spark plugs, if you buy them at the auto parts store, they're anywhere from $4 to $10 each, and depending on how many you need. The Chevy Tahoe takes 8 spark plugs, so you've got about $40 to $80 worth. And then your mechanic's going to upcharge you on the spark plugs. But anyway, spark plugs are not that hard to install. They probably an hour of labor, give or take. On the Tahoe, there's some in the back here, so it might be an hour to 2 hours labor. I don't know. Anyway, that's a lot more simple process than taking the whole engine apart and replacing the head gasket. So, all right, so make sure that it's not just something simple if your car won't start, and it's really hard to know and trust mechanics of that. Okay, so next, on to the next example of where I was scammed. This was me. I lived in San Diego, California about 15 or 20 years ago, right out there where AR is. So I took a recommendation from my boss to go to a mechanic, and because I needed a car repaired, and recommendations are good, but they don't always work. So I went to this place for a couple things on a couple occasions. Well, I had a coolant leak, and I could tell that I was leaking coolant because the coolant levels were constantly going down in my truck, and I was constantly having to put water in or coolant. So I didn't know what it was. Well, anyway, what happened was it was this quick release hose on the 1997 Chevy Tahoe. Okay, they ended up charging me for a whole new head gasket, and all they did was seal this hose off with some kind of adhesive caulk or something, and it just temporarily fixed the problem. I paid about $1,400 to have a new head gasket put on, and I don't think they even opened my engine to do that. In addition to that, when I came back, this was unplugged. They actually were, I believe, sabotaging my engine. This is it's one of the power cables to the AC compressor, and that was disconnected. Now in San Diego, the weather's generally pretty cool, around 50 to 60 degrees. So over time, I could have waited 2 or 3 months till it got a hot day to turn on my AC, and it wouldn't have worked. I think they knew this. So that place is called San Carlos Auto in San Diego, California. So if you're out there, watch out for it. I don't know if they've set their record straight after 20 years, but we'll just have to see. So, but anyway, that's a good way I got scammed, because this quick release hose is only about an hour of labor, and the part itself costs about $15. So, but another thing you want to watch out for is a lot of times you can just have a dead battery, like in my other video where car won't start, and a dealership will take advantage of you there, saying it's something else that it's not, when all it is a battery, and they just recharge your battery, or they'll put a new battery in. Usually they'll recharge your battery. So things like that, you just gotta be aware, look out. So those are some areas where I was scammed. Like I said, you do want to make sure a good way to protect yourself is before you take a car in to be worked on, even if it doesn't run, take some pictures or video of your engine. And specifically, like I'm doing here, just kind of scan over it. And you can see here, for instance, this part's a different color. This is very new versus this alternator, which has some salt residue on it. So you can tell that's an older alternator. You can also take a picture of the serial numbers on your stuff, or put a little piece of black marker on it. But the problem is, if you don't know what parts are being replaced, you don't know. But sometimes you can actually see what part has been replaced. You can see if things have been removed, but you can also see if things were not put back properly. So you want to make sure of that. But you just have to protect yourself. Like I said, mechanics are struggling nowadays because YouTube has caused a lot of people to fix things themselves or get friends to fix them. It's sort of like cable companies cutting the cord. The people who still have cable end up paying a heck of a lot more because other people are not using cable. So, all right, guys. Well, the last way that I protect myself from being scammed by mechanics is I'll go to oil change places to get inspections done and to get actual oil changes. You can also get a fuel filter replaced at a mechanic. So if you're having trouble starting your car's kind of stalling out, things like that. Because if you go to a mechanic, you just don't know what they're tampering with. I try to stay away from mechanics, just if I don't have to, because a lot of times things don't get put back right. Like I said, that rush to get labor done, or the company is dishonest. So when I do work on my cars myself, they rarely have problems, knock on wood, with the exception of hoses and electrical stuff that goes bad over time, on certain models of cars. Like the good old PT Cruiser over there, about everything electrical in that car has gone bad. So this is a very scary way that a mechanic can rip you off, dishonest, and it is a form of fraud. Very hard to prove. A lot of times radiator hoses, when a mechanic's working on your car, they, even underneath this little slip here, they can just slice the radiator hose with a little bit razor, not enough to make it leak right away, but over time, the pressure from this hot coolant going through there, over the next 2 or 3 months, that hose can actually burst from that slice they make. And it's very difficult to prove, because what happens is the hose bursts where the slice mark is, and you can't see the slice mark anymore. So that's hard to prove. It's just a way of saying, if you've been to your mechanic, and then a couple of months later, you have to return to that mechanic, usually with a coolant leak or something else, search your hoses and see if that's the issue. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't check their coolant levels or watch their temperature gauge, and then the engine actually gets ruined because they drive without coolant in the car. So that's something to look for, but it can also happen with power steering hoses, which the fluid also gets hot. Then some cars have, diesel cars have oil hoses. But a good way to also tell is if your hose isn't really cracked, usually hoses burst when they're old and cracked. That's not always true, but it can be. But coolant hoses can crack. Now the AC hoses can have the same issue. If you have your AC worked on, they can put a little slice in there because that's under pressure as well. So hoses are a common cause of having to return to a mechanic, and mechanics know that. And then the mechanic can charge you and say, you need a new compressor, you need a new radiator, blah, blah, blah. It really sets you up for, they're not going to necessarily say you need a new hose replaced. They're going to charge you for a lot more because the labor on those hoses are cheap. So be vigilant about that, and just be aware that it's rare, but some mechanics do commit this form of fraud. There's plenty of videos on that on YouTube about like news stations that hide cameras in the engine. I'm not sure where the heck they hide them, but they hide little tiny cameras while the mechanic's working, and one of them does show the mechanic slicing the hose with a razor blade. It's really scary to know this really happens, but if a good sign, like I said, do not return to a mechanic. If you've having to go to that mechanic several times over the period of a year, something's wrong with that mechanic. They're just not getting things right. You can't blame it on your car. So time to get a second opinion if stuff like that starts happening. And the second opinion, mechanic might even find a slice in the hose or something because they want to gain your trust in your work. So, all right. So oil change places are a great place to go just to get simple stuff done. They will try to upcharge you on some stuff, like cabin air filter. Now Chevy Tahoe does not have a 97 Chevy Tahoe does not have a cabin air filter. But even just your air filter for your car, stuff you can go to a Walmart and buy yourself and replace yourself very easily. Windshield wipers, stuff like that. They may try to sell you upcharge services, which are just unnecessary, like engine or coolant flushes, things like that. You don't necessarily need those either. You know, power steering flushes, things like that. I never really flush my car. Some mechanics say you need it, some you don't. I personally don't do it. I think it can cause some issues. You can drain it out, but anyway, so like I said, they'll try to upsell you on a lot of maintenance stuff at Jiffy Lube, but they're not going to tamper with your engine or mess something up when you're just getting an oil change, which is a regular maintenance thing you should do. Things like that. So that's a good way to, like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. A little maintenance and a little oil changes keep the mechanics away. So go to an oil change place if you just need oil changes or inspection done on your car. You don't want to end up going to a mechanic where they can actually mess stuff up, or even if you're getting your car inspected, they could say there's something else wrong where you have to have that fixed and it costs more than, just the biggest thing they're going to get you on with inspections at a oil change place is the windshield wipers not having enough on there. And they don't sell tires at oil change places, but if your tires are worn down, they'll definitely end up failing your inspection on that. So if there's misalignment. Okay guys, well, hopefully this helps you protect yourself. Not all mechanics are trying to rip you off. Sometimes it's errors, sometimes it's things like that, but you just got to be vigilant and watch out. And as I said, I always stay with my car when I can if I go to a mechanic. Another way to tell if a mechanic is good, it's not always true, but if there's a couple-day turnover to where you can have your car fixed, that can tend to mean that that's a good mechanic. Like if it's not a dealership, that they're backed up because their service is good and they actually fix people's cars. And if they're getting a lot of work, they probably don't need to sabotage or rip people off. I have noticed that. So if there's a wait to get your, like a couple day wait to have your car fixed at a mechanic, that might be a good mechanic. Not always true, but good chance it is. It means that mechanics working on a regular basis and not creating work for themselves, hopefully. So there's a heads up for you. All right guys, well, thanks for watching this video, and I hope it helped you out, and I hope you can get your car repaired, and hopefully you can avoid being ripped off. And it happens. It's really sad and scary, and you just need to get your car right. But a lot of times when you go to a mechanic, it's not what they tell you it is, and you get charged a lot more for something that's so simple, such as spark plugs or a dead battery or just things like that. So doing research on Google and talking to auto parts stores is the best way to protect yourself. And like I said, having a second car is the ultimate way of protecting yourself, because you don't have to rush to get that car fixed, and you can actually wait with that car while it's being repaired. All right guys, thanks for watching. This is Drew with Drew's Quick Fixes and Hacks. Have a good one. Thanks.